This is BBC London 94.9.
London's news.
London's stories.
You're listening to Simon Lederman.
Simon Lederman Show, BBC London 94.9, taking your calls Monday to Thursday night, 10 till 1 on 0207 224 2000. More of your calls coming through. Also, delighted to say that for the next hour of the programme, we're in the company of Paul Robinson, who's a media mogul, a major media mogul, may I say. Welcome to the show, because when I first met you, you were basically running the BBC, and now you're running all of radio in spirit.
Well, I think that's slightly over-generous, but I quite like the major bit. I'll keep that, Simon. Thanks very much.
Have that for the CV. Have that on me. Paul is Chief Executive of the Radio Academy, and also involved in your own television work, which we might talk about if we've got time later on. Also joining us for the first time tonight, Jonathan Davis, who's a wealth manager. He's looking very wealthy, so he's obviously doing something right. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Simon. I'm running in my car. He's running the world, and I'm running my car.
You're running
He's got a gold-coloured jacket, though, so he's exuding wealth, I think, and prosperity.
It's more peachy.
I was going to say it's gold bordering on salmon or peach, but I think probably worth its weight in gold.
I'll take my glasses off then.
Just to make sure.
Yeah.
Listen, welcome to both of you. It's very good to see you both here tonight. We've been talking about a number of things in the last hour of the programme. I don't know whether you heard our story about the widower whose wife died from lung cancer, who was being looked after by the GP, and the widower ended up being married to the GP. Some people are judging them. We're wondering whether either of you judge this gentleman and that relationship.
I can't say I do. If two people fell in love, I don't see what the problem is. 17
days after the death of his wife.
Well, perhaps if there's anything ulterior to look into, people will look into it. But it's not. I don't think it's for us to judge.
Paul?
Yeah, I think I broadly agree with that. As long as the professional relationship, whilst there was a caring relationship going on, that's fine. 17 days is a shade short, but love can do strange things to you, and if they're genuinely in love and happy, and that's what's going to make both of them happy, then I think we shouldn't judge, and good luck to them. All
right, well, look, we're going to take more of your calls, emails and texts on that, but I want to get right underway with some of the stories that you brought in tonight. Jonathan, we can speak to you first. We can ask about the latest surprise development in the energy battle, that energy customers are not cash cows, we're being told, or certainly they're being told, and we've got the latest price rises, which is not as high as we might have thought.
EDF Energy is raising its prices by just under 4%. Well, hey, it's only just under 4%. When aggregate incomes are flat or falling, apparently we're meant to be delighted that energy prices from this company are only rising just under 4%.
We should be surprised and delighted, shouldn't we? Because some of them are getting us out 10%, if not more.
Well, indeed, and the energy minister is saying that they shouldn't treat customers as cash cows, and the energy companies themselves are saying, hey, don't blame us, Gov. We've got all these green taxes to cover, as it were. We've got all your regulation and environmental costs. And the fact that our chief executives and senior directors are earning absolute fortunes, and the dividends are absolutely huge, and everyone's earning a great deal of money, it's nothing to do with us.
But it isn't anything to do with us, is it? I mean, actually, their job as a company is to make money, and their job as a company is also to charge as much as they can legally, legitimately and professionally get away with. And if they're making 5% profit, which many of those companies are, there's not that much wrong with that. Supermarkets make, what do they make, 9% profit?
I am the first to say that we should not be embarrassed to make money. On the contrary, I think one of the problems we have in our economy is that there are too many, I'm going to use a jargonistic word here, there are too many oligopolies. In other words, there are too many industries where there are few really large players. You mentioned groceries. Everyone knows about the big four. Then we've got clearly the big 6 energy companies. We've got the big 4 or maybe 5 banks. Too many oligopolies making money hand over fist at the expense of customers who clearly have very little power and very little say.
But you're a wealth manager. That's capitalism, isn't it? I mean, if they didn't make money, pension funds will go south, and anybody with any stocks and shares, minute stocks and shareholding as part of their ISA will lose money. That's what we need, isn't it?
Everyone says that what we have is capitalism. I would suggest to you we haven't had capitalism in this country for decades, and indeed right across the West. What we have, and I'll coin the term, is crony capitalism, where if you, for example, get into a quasi-cartel, I'm not saying legally, I'm not saying that there's a cartel going, but hey, if it walks like a duck and squawks like a duck, etc., and you get close to government, you get close to the central bank, then you have an opportunity to make money while screwing everyone else.
Paul,
that is not fair.
Are you relieved that it's only 3.9%, or are you aghast at the figure of 3.9%?
Well, I mean, 3.9 is better than 8, but it's still a lot of money. And as saying, I mean, incomes are flat or falling. So, the percentage people are now spending of their total household income is actually increasing, in terms of the total spend. And that doesn't seem fair, because you've got to have fuel, you've got to have power. And to this point that was raised about, that Jonathan raised about the oligopolies, inevitably in business, you're going to have a number of players who will tend to consolidate. That's what tends to happen. People take each other over. With 5 or 6 players, I would have thought that would produce enough competition in the market. What I would hope would happen is, even though 3.9% is actually, I think, a steep increase, people should try and move to the company with a 3.9% increase rather than the 8% increase. The problem is that it's quite hard to change your supplier. It's a hassle to do it. So that needs to be made easier. But what I want to know is really why 3.9%, even 3.9. It's not just about the green taxes. I've seen data suggesting that wholesale prices are not rising by anything like 3.9%. So if the price at which the companies are buying in the fuel is not going up, why are they increasing it by much, much more? That means they must be increasing their profit. And that doesn't seem right.
They say they're not. They say that some of that is made up of things like transport costs. I think the actual price of energy that they are charging has gone up by 1%. Is that right?
Well,
that's what they were talking today.
2 points. One, a certain Mandy Rice Davis in 1960 said, well,
I've heard of her, yes.
They would say that, wouldn't they, to paraphrase her. And secondly...
Well, this is what the BBC were reporting as what their price rise is made up of. So whether the BBC have a vested interest, I don't know, but we got to keep our studios alight anyway.
Indeed.
I don't know who gives us our energy, actually. I don't see the bills. I don't...
Well, maybe the BBC's got an energy company.
Maybe we do.
And in-house, who knows?
The hot air that we...
As to 1% rise on the wholesale, well, I don't know about oil. I think oil's been pretty flat the last 2 or 3 years. But natural gas on the global markets, for the 4 years until May of last year, fell 80% due to fracking, getting the shale gas out of the ground. Of course, it's had a bad press, but the price of gas has plummeted. So I don't know where we're getting it from, that the wholesale gas is broadly unmoved, because I would suggest that overall the last few years it's probably gone down. And
just lastly on this, what would you do? Because clearly the government are not always the best at making us pay the least they can. If you think about the railway industry, it has been privatised, but the government set some of the fares, and they also charge those railway companies money to pay back to the government. So it's not as if the government don't want the money either. If it was state-owned, if it is private-owned, in the end, companies collapse onto each other. They will always take each other over. That's the way things work. You can't mess with the market, can you?
And if that were the case, then there would be more competition in the energy market. Take groceries again. We've got the likes of Aldi and Lidl coming up behind the big four.
Which makes 6, so we're in exactly the same in the supermarkets as we are in electricity.
But Aldi and Lidl are true competitors, whereas the other 4 are in a league of their own, basically. If you watch a TV advert for one of those 4, they never talk about Aldi or Lidl. It's always the other 3. And Aldi and Lidl are really big growers. So I'm not at all an expert in the energy market, but somehow there has to be a way to let the minnows in the energy market get access to more and more customers, because these are the guys who will bring real competition and bring actual prices down, not just limit the rate of increases.
Athol on the tweet says, can't the energy companies buy enough fuel so that they can put the prices down when it's coming to winter?
Well, I as I say, it comes back to, as Paul says, I'm quite sure it's the case. As well as all the green stuff they've got to pay for, as well as all the regulation they've got to cover for, I think these guys are making vast profits. So, yes, isn't it funny that when the prices go up, they raise the prices quickly. When the prices go down, we don't seem to get big falls in prices. Isn't that funny?
Got some interesting text coming through about the economy, which I'm going to put to you later, but I can't do it all in one go because I think people are going to reach for the migraine tablets. Not because what you're saying is not interesting, but it always you can only take so much bad news in little chunks, and we shall mix that and match that in. Jonathan Davis is a wealth manager. Paul Robinson is a media mogul. We're reviewing the day, and we'll get your thoughts, emails, and texts and calls throughout the programme. Paul, can we talk about the BBC? Because apparently the BBC is listening.
Yeah, the BBC has had a pretty bad year. And the BBC is a fantastic organisation. And I say that not just because I work there, not just because this is BBC London 94.9, but actually the BBC does do a great job generally. But it also has this ability, I think, to shoot itself in the foot rather easily. What's great about this new initiative... Both feet at the same time sometimes too, and very badly. It's not been a good year for the BBC, and the BBC needs to rebuild that trust, particularly when we get into a licence fee negotiation. And I think most people would probably argue the licence fee is the least worst way of funding the BBC. No one's come up with a better way of doing it. If you want an organisation that's not going to be driven by the market, back to the energy point, and not driven by ratings. So what's really good about this initiative is the BBC are actually going to genuinely, I think, open up consultation to audiences and say, what do you think? What are we doing well? What are we doing badly? And I think what's also really interesting here is there's a sort of challenge to the BBC in terms of technology, which is just changing the way people watch. You look at any child and they don't really watch the television in the living room. They're watching on their phone or on their iPad or another sort of device. And they may not be watching channels either. Their loyalty is to programmes, not to BBC One or ITV or Channel 5. It's to the shows they like. So that's a fundamental challenge to the BBC, thinking about how it funds itself, but also about how it delivers its programmes. And the BBC seems to be saying, we're going to actually ask you about this. What shows do you like? What stuff should we be doing? And also, how do you want to get it in future? Is
there a danger of that? Because in a sense, most audiences are not working in broadcasting because they don't know what the audience want. Otherwise, we'll all be doing it. And if you think about some of the great and groundbreaking programmes, not just the BBC, but ITV, Channel 4 do, if it wasn't invented, most people wouldn't have thought of it.
No, I agree. This is where sometimes this research thing is nonsense. People say we're going to test our new programmes and put them into research. And, whether it's music or it's a TV show or a movie, I can assure you that the things that always come out best in research are the things because people can't judge stuff they don't know. And, when a new show comes on, you're not sure who the characters are or where it's going, and it takes a while to get into it. So they're not doing that sensibly. But what you can do is say, what sort of stuff should the BBC be doing? Should it be doing more soaps? Should it be doing more high-end drama? Should it be doing more documentaries? Should it be doing music, religion? These are the sort of big questions. What do you want from the BBC? Should the BBC do its version of X Factor? Well, probably not. The BBC should be innovating and leading the way.
Doesn't it do its own version of X Factor?
Well, the voice.
But you could argue.
Well, I don't think swivelling chairs is enough of an innovation.
Which is the best bit, by the way.
It is the best bit. And after that, it all goes rather dull. And it's interesting how the audiences then fall off a cliff after the chairs have stopped swivelling.
Yes.
To me, that's not good enough. And of course, we had the really bad one the BBC did years ago was Fame Academy.
Yes.
Which was
lasted one series. No, normally never one series. Normally we'd give it a couple.
Give it a couple. But the BBC shouldn't do that. But a good example is something like Strictly, which is an old BBC format, come dancing, in the ballroom, very old fashioned, reinvented, modern audience, massive audience on Saturday night, fantastic, big tick.
Jonathan, do you like BBC TV? Gosh,
I like a lot.
I'll take that as a no. That force.
I think he's a deep thinker.
It's a yes and no. I like a lot of BBC TV, and the BBC absolutely does some really, really great things. If I may say, I think the question often comes round to should the BBC stay as it is, or should it be privatised? I don't think it should be either. I think that the parts that the BBC does, which is basically the same as commercial telly and radio, should be privatised. But the parts that the commercial media will never do, such as local radio, such as the great nature stuff, such as Six Music, Radios 3, Radio 4, BBC 2, BBC 3 and 4, these should stay in the public sector and paid for by, I guess, a licence fee or something like that. But come on, Strictly, and most of Saturday night viewing, most of the BBC One, Radio 2, even 5 Live is copied by the commercial side.
Is there not a danger, though, that if you only get the areas that the commercial sector would never touch, a majority of the audience who may not enjoy those programmes will say, why on earth am I paying for the BBC?
Well, isn't that the question right now? That's exactly the same question we have right now.
The BBC can say it has a penetration. Well, you might know what the BBC penetration is to homes in the country, but it must be pretty high.
90%, 90%. The thing about that is, I think it's interesting. What you're saying is the BBC should actually only correct market failure. Effectively, you're saying if the market provides it, it shouldn't do it. If the market doesn't provide it, it should do it. And I have to say, I fundamentally think you're wrong about Radio 1 and Radio 2. Radio 1 and Radio 2 are public service channels in everything they do, and they are not copied by the commercial sector. There is nothing in the commercial sector like Radio 1 or Radio 2. If they were not part of the BBC, they would not exist, and that would be a real loss to the audience.
Well, I don't want to go down to individual programmes, but
you mentioned them, which is why I picked it up
on the radio. But I would actually disagree with you, Paul. I think there's a lot that, for example, on Radio 2 that is indeed in the commercial sphere.
Okay.
We'll get your reaction, because I know that the BBC is always an incredibly excitable topic, even though clearly you love part of the BBC because you listen to this station and this programme. 0207 224 2000. Before we move on, I just want to talk a little bit about Jonathan Davis himself. I won't spare your blushes because this is about you, and it's your specialist subject, because it's your first night with us. You're a wealth manager. What does that mean?
It means that I work with families only. Others might work with businesses, and I advise on reducing taxes, on their investments, on their retirement planning, on ensuring that they're okay if anything goes wrong. The colloquial term is financial advisor, but it's a bit more than that.
And are most people bad with money? Naturally, do you think we're not educated enough in how to look after money, what overdraft means, how to balance your income with your outgoings?
I think most people understand that they need to plan for their retirement, because their retirement's going to be a blooming long time. And they need to put things aside to ensure that they're financially secure then. The problem is that the whole thing is so complex. And when you have complex affairs, for instance, if you earn a lot of money paying a lot of tax, or you got a lot of money here or abroad or whatever, then I would suggest it's better to advise than not have. If you don't have a vast amount of money, then it can be quite simple, because you should just invest in a pension, reduce your debt, and take out life assurance. And
given the difficulty that the country is in at the moment, particularly with the deficit and the debt, which of course are two different things that the government is suffering,
Thank you for pointing that out, because most people don't.
I knew you'd enjoy that. Is it important? Is it actually important that we all don't do our best to limit all the taxes that we should perhaps pay, but find loopholes not to? Isn't that slightly morally irresponsible?
No, not at all.
Why not?
Because no one's going to bail us out. They might bail out the bankers, and they're doing that every single year, but I tell you what, they're not going to bail us out individually. So it's actually our moral responsibility to look after ourselves, because no one's going to do it for us.
Does anybody teach you, Paul, how to deal with money?
No, not at all. I mean, pocket money, you sort of learn quite quickly, don't you? You get given your 50 pence or 10 shillings, whatever it was when I got my first pocket. No, it's less than that, but half a crown. I'm totally exaggerating. I'm thinking dinner money was 5 shillings. So I think I got 2 and 6, which is half a crown, yeah.
Cool.
I think
you had to do something around the house, I imagine, for that.
Well, I had to go do stuff around the house, like clean my dad's car and make the beds and stuff. But no, I remember I used to go and spend all my money in the record shop. So I'd go and buy singles, which were 1 and 11 pence. So I knew then I had a bit of money, I had 7 pence left, and I couldn't buy another one until I got my next week's pocket money. So that's very basic economics, isn't it? But no, the serious point is, no, I didn't. We were talking about this earlier. At university didn't learn it, school didn't learn it. I did a second degree and learned a bit about it, but you just learn on the job. And I think I totally agree. It's terribly complex. I think my affairs are not terribly disastrous, but they probably could be better with your advice. But it is difficult, and
take the lift together later on your journey down. I think that may well be the way forward. And just for those who are intrigued about the deficit and the debt, from my own reading, the deficit is the difference between the government's incomings and outgoings, but by reducing the deficit means you do nothing for the debt because you're still in deficit.
By reducing the deficit, you're still taking on more and more borrowings every year. And our illustrious so-called capitalist government is borrowing £120 billion a year.
Who from?
From banks, largely, pension
that
funds,
we own,
other
so we're
governments.
okay, are we not? If we own the bank that we're borrowing the money from?
Yeah, it doesn't work that way. Because when, or if and when we actually finally bite the bullet and allow these failed banks to go under, then we'll have a chance to get out of the economic problem morass that we're in. But the thing is, this £120 billion, to put it into perspective, without going into too many details, it's equivalent to a household, an average household, borrowing £1,000 a month to achieve not a lot. That's how dreadful our finances are.